Joe Lynham. Now, for the best part of 1,000 years, the principle of double jeopardy has meant that, except in pretty rare cases, you can't be tried twice for the same offence. Well, today, the captain of Chelsea football team, John Terry, discovered the limits of double jeopardy. He was found not guilty of racial abuse in a court case this summer, yet today the Football Association banned him from 4 matches and fined him a couple of £100,000 for the same offence. He has a right to appeal, although he's not yet said whether he will. Steve Smith reports.
Is John Terry a racist who's finally been made an example of? Or a man cleared in the eyes of the law, only to be punished by an anonymous FA panel sitting behind closed doors? What's not in doubt is that the Chelsea captain did utter abusive language, including the word black, to Anton Ferdinand in a Premier League game almost a year ago. But Terry claimed he was merely repeating what he thought the QPR defender had said to him. And that defence was good enough for Westminster Magistrates Court, where the player was found not guilty of racial abuse following a trial in July. Despite that, the FA went ahead with its own disciplinary hearing this week. On the eve of that, the on-off England captain Terry announced his retirement from international football, saying that the procedure had left his position untenable. Some feel the whole saga has been dragged out for too long.
It's not been good because of what it's been about, and I don't think it's helped at all that it was extended. I think this would have been far better if it had been taken on board before the Euros.
Ferdinand snubs Terry earlier this season. The etiquette of the handshake, offered, refused, has become a vital part of match day. Elsewhere, Manchester United's Patrice Evra is ignored by Luis Suarez after the FA found the Liverpool forward guilty of racial abuse. Football forums and phone-ins are wondering tonight why Terry will sit out 4 games and pay a fine of £220,000 when Suarez was banned for 8 games and fined £40,000. The FA has yet to elaborate on today's finding.
It seems in stark contrast to the way our Olympians behaved in the summer. And I think the use of this kind of language, whatever the provocation, whatever the reason, the way players behave towards each other, the way they behave towards match officials, is completely wrong. And it's something that's got to change in football.
But an England great who notoriously suffered abuse says the problem of racism goes beyond our football grounds.
The FA can do nothing in getting rid of racism. You cannot get rid of racism out of football as long as it exists in society. And the only thing so therefore we have to target it in society, not just in football. So the FA can only do what it can in terms of governing its own health, which is a 90 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 times a week.
The penalties against John Terry are suspended for 14 days while he decides whether or not to appeal. He says he's waiting for the FA's full written judgment.
Well, Pat Nevin played nearly 200 times for John Terry's club, Chelsea. He joins us from Edinburgh. And Raj Chandarana speaks on equality for the Football Supporters Federation. The language which Terry used is deeply offensive, but to make sense of what the Football Association decided, just to warn you, the offensive words could come up in this discussion. Now, first off, in Edinburgh, what do you make of the fact that someone can be acquitted by a court of law and then found guilty by the FA?
Well, I was very surprised it went that far. If you look at the rules and the Articles of Association of the FA, in there it would suggest that the rule of law should be taken into account, and they wouldn't have gone this far. There's a part of me that does applaud the FA for taking this very seriously, and indeed in football we have taken any suggestions of racism very seriously for a good few years now. In fact, I would argue that football has been in the vanguard of changing society and has had a positive effect on it. However, on this occasion, I am very, very uncomfortable after working myself for about 32 years, as I say, against, working for anti-racism campaigns. This one leaves me feel uncomfortable because, as far as I understand it, being found not guilty, but it's the use of the words and not the context that's been taken into account.
We'll come to the point of the context in a second or two. What do you make of the fact that there can be an acquittal in a court of law and a conviction by the FA, Raj Chandarana?
I think the main point that you need to distinguish is that the FA are the custodians of English football and the rules of football, and the charges brought against John Terry by them were in the context of breaking football rules, whereas the court case was about a public order offence, which he was acquitted of. He was charged with a public order offence aggravated by race. And so there are two different standards. There's a criminal court case about law, and then there's a breaking of a rule case where the burden of proof is different. It's about the balance of probabilities.
But they're both about racism.
They are yes, they are both about racism.
And the thing that the FA appeared to do was to discount, as Pat Nevin says, we'll come back to you in a second, Pat, what the FA appeared to do was to discount the context in which the remarks, these very offensive remarks, were made.
Well, we don't actually know that. We haven't seen the full report from the panel. So we can't actually say why they came to the conclusion that they did. In a previous case with Patrice Evra and Luis Suarez, there was a very detailed report which discussed why the balance of probabilities were as they were and why that case was found against Suarez. Until we get that full report, we can't really comment on why the FA panel made the decision and the ruling that it did.
All right, well, we'll come to that case in a moment or two, but what do you make of this distinction about context, Pat Nevin?
Well, I was stunned by it, really, because if you ignore the context of any conversation you have, it can completely and utterly change the meaning of it. And indeed, 100%, it changes 180 degrees, the meaning of this. I would ask anyone to say, if you ignore the context, well, just imagine a scenario where you go to the referee and say, him over there, he called me a so-and-so and a so-and-so. Well, you get sent off and you get charged with the FA, even though you're only reporting a crime, because the context is unimportant. Of course the context is important. As Raj correctly says, we have to wait until the full written report comes out. But I'd be really surprised if it comes out with anything more than that, because if it does, it will be disagreeing with the law courts. This
raises the whole question of why the FA is so useless in all sorts of respects, doesn't it? I bet you're far too diplomatic to put it like that. But you raised this question of Luis Suarez, for example, who gets an 8-match ban for using the word Negro, and John Terry, who calls someone 3 very bad words, he gets a shorter ban. Now, what's going on?
I think one of the problems with the FA is, in a way, they're caught in the middle. You've got government quite rightly saying to the FA, get your house in order. Racism is an issue that we thought had been tackled and had gone. Clearly it hasn't, whether it be at grassroots level or at national level and in the national game. So the FA feel obliged to do something. And I think that the real problem and the real difficulty the FA have and where they need to go in the future is to be absolutely transparent about the rules of the game and how they apply in the context of racism. I mean, this whole thing about having a secret committee deciding one thing for one individual and another thing for another, I think that is where they fall foul, and it needs to be more transparent.
Do you understand what these guys are doing at the FA when they come to these two such contradictory, such at variance judgments?
Well, in my period of time as the chairman of the PFA, we did many times disagree with the treatment of the players, and we stood up for the players in situations. This is a difficult one, obviously, for the PFA. But there's been time and again that I've disagreed with the FA, but let's not get it out of context. They get a lot of things absolutely right. But on this occasion, I think they've been a little bit frightened with the fact that as soon as racism becomes a discussion, it becomes delicate, and they want to be seen to have some effect and some action. And I understand that, but do not let fairness and do not let justice fall by the wayside where you're trying. Because eventually, we may, I don't know if we'll ever find out, but may one day find out that John Terry did simply ask the question. And if that's the case, then there's a stain in his character now. A stain in his character that he may never get rid of, and it might be unfair. And I just don't like to see miscarriages of justice in any position. And it's just because it's racism that raises its ugly head, I don't think that's any excuse.
OK, thank you both very much.